Hi, thank you for joining me, Leon van Rensburg, at BIM Harambee Africa, and this session on BIM and its impact on the property business. Now, I'm sure you've had many videos that you've watched and some phenomenal speakers sharing their knowledge and the content with you around BIM and various aspects of that. The one question that's on a lot of our minds is, how does it impact the property business? How does it impact the facilities management business? And there are many factions across the world right now that is trying to find the balance between this. So I thought that for this session, it could be good to start off with a story. This is a real story. This is what happened to me. So in about 2011, just after the World Cup had hit South Africa, I found myself on a construction site. There I am. I am a consultant and operator in the hospitality sector. I find myself on a hotel, brand new hotel that's being constructed, and trying to figure out how does this whole world be put together between the professional team and the operations team. So standing there, the first instruction was very clear from the owner, Leon, make sure that the finishes in this hotel is 5-star standard, because that's what we were aiming for, firstly. And secondly, you got to make money. Okay, this is a business, and this business needs to make money. I've got loans to pay back, so we can't take too long to get actions. Now, at that stage, one of my fortes were business turnaround. So me and a team used to come into hotels, and we had anywhere between 6 months and 18 months to turn around the operations and the revenue generation for those hotels. So I wasn't too unfamiliar with the concept, but I've never done that for a brand new hotel. So this wasn't really a turnaround, this was a brand new start. The first meeting I joined in this hotel, besides meeting the owner-operator, I found myself between a professional team, the architect and the project manager, the construction crew, the owner-operator, the owners, and myself as the consultant and the operator. And I remember looking at this A0 drawing on the table and thinking to myself, geez, these are some nice lines. I have no understanding of the complex world that's gone into this drawing and all this effort that has gone into that. I looked at it and I simply stood there and I felt very overwhelmed. I had a lot of knowledge on systems and processes and procedures to operate a hotel. I knew the strings to pull to get people to do what I want them to do so that we can generate the revenue, keep the guests happy, you know. But standing there, having to bring this picture into mind, I was absolutely dumbfounded. And one of the first things in that meeting that we had to do was the electrical layouts in the rooms. Now, it may sound silly, but you know, from a guest experience in a hotel room, if you're staying there and the plugs are in the wrong place, or you don't have the correct plugs, or your lighting is in the wrong area, that affects your whole ambience of your room. That affects your whole impact that this hotel room has on your stay. So I understood the concept of what would needed to be done, but I had no idea how to visualize it on the two-dimensional drawings that they positioned in front of me. What was very clear is that everybody operated in their own silos. The professional team, the construction team, the external consultants, the owner-operator, myself as the consultant. We all spoke our own language. We did our own things. You know, the construction team was doing what they needed to do. The professional team was doing what they needed to do. The owner was doing what they did. Changed their mind quite a lot on this particular project. But everyone was talking, but no one was sharing information. And this is very important because, you know, we were saying things and we were doing a lot, but none of us were really on the same level. You know, think of speaking to kids. For those of you that got kids, you know, you as the parent, you understand those kids very well, but anybody else coming out, they don't understand those children. They don't understand the word formulation that they use. You know, it's the same in industries, various industries across the world. In the mining, they speak Fanagalo. You know, that's a unique language that got created so that the diversity on the mines weren't impacted so badly and they could still be operational. And this is what I felt on this site. You know, we had the people coming in talking about HVACs and all sorts of systems and rebar and detailing. And at that stage, I had no concept for this. For me, an HVAC system is air conditioning. That's how simple we make it in operations. But the professional team, there was a distinct difference between the HVAC and the air conditioner, the air conditioner just being a part of that. And the interior team, as an example, they spec'd a beautiful carpet for the public areas and the passages, only to find that carpet that they were spec'd couldn't handle the amount of traffic that was assumed to be through that hotel. So at first, opening up the hotel, that would look fantastic. But when you now need to look at your maintenance cycles, it means that every 2 years you're going to be having, you have to change your carpets. So there's an impact to your clients. There's also a perception. You're not maybe using such top quality products all of a sudden, or it starts looking tattered after a year instead of it lasting a little bit better or wearing a bit more, a little bit better. The finishes on the wall, as another example in the passages or the high traffic areas, the finishes were stunning. It looked beautiful. The problem again was that it wasn't hardened enough to actually carry the traffic that needed to go through. Suitcases being dragged, kids running up and down, trolleys being pushed for housekeeping, all of these types of things. When I looked at the plans and I finally could get my mind around this and I walked site a few times, I realized that we had no laundry room, as an example. And all of these things were very clear for me because we weren't communicating. At that stage, it was just a frustration and an irritation. There was a lot of money already spent on this project, and the only thing is we needed to make money. So the question that I then sat with is, how do we integrate these systems? How do we regenerate asset information that we needed to? We had to rewrite maintenance manuals. We had to rewrite the schedules completely. We didn't know what the maintenance cycles were on our air conditioners. We actually had to go and research that again and find the manufacturers to get that information, and we repopulated a lot of this information. We had this fantastic lighting system that they brought in from, I think it was Germany at that stage. It was electronic and it was very fancy, and it had this control panel that nobody could understand. Firstly, because it was in German, and then eventually we managed to get it into English. And the day everybody left site, and I was practicing our dry run, so we invite some friends and families and also PR people to come and enjoy the hotel. 6 o'clock in the evening, I couldn't switch on the lights. I couldn't remember the sequence and what to do. There we were trying to find the electricians or the people that installed this again, just to grip our minds around what are we supposed to be doing here. It wasn't as simple as just flicking a switch, unfortunately. During the night, the rest of the night went pretty smooth. During the night, one of the guests went up to their room, and as they went up to the room, they wanted to go and have a shower, and all of a sudden the water just couldn't switch off. They turned open the tap, they had their shower, and as they turned it off, the water just kept on flowing and flowing and flowing and flowing and flowing. And it happened in a few rooms because there was something wrong with the taps. I couldn't remember exactly what. They came down, they told me about the problem, but I didn't know where the main waters were, the main water switch was. So we couldn't switch off the water. We had to phone the contractor again to say, listen, where's the main water feed so that we can actually switch it off so that we can look at that problem during the night or in the morning. These were common around that constant struggle for finding information. If we just had to think of where would you find information right now. I live in a house in Pretoria, and I just think that if I had to build at that property, I need to find the drawings of that house. I wouldn't know where those drawings were because the repository that generally had all of this burnt down. If my wife tells me quite regularly, please keep the manuals, for our dishwasher, or for the washing machine, or whatever the case may be. And that may sound mundane and that may sound very silly, but come the time when you need it, if you don't know where to find that information, you're going to be spending so much time trying to figure it out. Something else that happened on the hotel was about a year after construction, the hotel has been operating a little bit, and all of a sudden my doors started giving problems, the locks on my doors and the safes. Now, these things all work with batteries. The battery operated, those key tags that you just tap and the door opens up. In the safe, it's an electronic safe, but it doesn't work with electricity, just batteries. The problem was on the safes and on the doors were no tags on who installed it. I can't remember the information on who supplied these locks. So we found a few suppliers, they all turned around and said, nope, sorry, that specific brand is no longer supported in South Africa. This generated more problems because now all of a sudden my guests can't get into their rooms or out of their rooms. They can't get into their safes. So I had one particular guest that needed to leave for the airport and we couldn't get into the safe. Eventually we had to break it open so that he can at least get his passport and leave. So after many calls, we eventually got somebody to come and fix this, the safes for us and the locks. And did the invoice, we paid them, and after we paid them, they came back to us and they said, actually, we went back onto your company and we supplied the products to you, the equipment in the first place. Did you know that those come with a 2-year warranty? No, I had no idea. I had no paperwork. I did not have that information on my property management system at that stage. They said, you do know that it's part of an SLA, service level agreement. No, again, this was information that perhaps it was lost, perhaps it wasn't transferred, or perhaps we just simply didn't understand when the professional team were communicating to the operational team. And this we find to be very common in our fields. In a world that revolves around data or information, why do we like recreating this data or information? Why do we love searching for this constantly? And I think it's got to do with it was always done that way. And that's a very big problem for us. The professional world, and by that I simply mean the professional team on a project, your architects, your engineers, construction crews, they have been pushed to adopt new technologies. Same as the property where you're moving away from your Excel spreadsheets or papers for writing down maintenance issues and things like that, and even your accounting systems, to newer, updated technologies in order to communicate. But yet, we spend about 80% of our time trying to find information or verify existing information because we don't trust the sources where it comes from. That is from a research that was done in the UK from the BIM Alliance. So the question is, why do we do this? Why do we constantly spend this amount of time? And for me, it was just, this is par for course. The guys left. I didn't know what information they had available to them. At that stage, I didn't even know about 3D models. I simply knew that I needed to make money in this hotel. I needed to operate this facility, and I had very tight budgets and timeframes. So running around, verifying information, that just caused massive delays in the success that we had from a project. And too often I find that we benchmark the success of a project on the actual construction. Was it done on time, on budget, or has this got this new fancy rating for whatever the case may be? And too seldom do we incorporate the components after that. Why don't we include the first 5 or 10 years of operations and say, has this business made money? Has the total project, because that's only a portion of it. People saying, and I believe this is information that was shared by Andrew Mason on a different session, that it's about 90% of the cost of a facility or a property or an asset is actually the lifetime of that thing. It's not the project itself. So something's going to cost you $1 million. It's going to cost you $9 million to operate this thing. So why don't we then include part of that to say, now this is a success? But we only look at the components in isolation. Again, remember the silos that I was talking about? No, do we integrate this information? One of the things I found was the miscommunication that was happening constantly. You know, I've since left that hospitality world, and I invested quite a lot of time in projects and why do projects fail. And I work for a software vendor currently, you know, and I do many BIM implementations. And from my experience, it became very clear that the language we speak, that is the one causing the trouble, not the actual language, not the difference between Portuguese or Swahili or Fanagalo or Afrikaans or English or whatever the case may be. We don't call a pipe or a column. You know, there's different terminologies in different sectors, and we refer to the same thing, but we call it something else. And I believe it's that common language, I call it a common language, that causes the breakdown and the lack of success that we could experience from this. You know, I used the example earlier of HVAC system and air conditioner as another example of this. And as we're going through this, my personal feeling as I was standing there is I literally was just bracing for impact. I was waiting for something to happen. You know, I was constantly anxious whether we're going to make our budgets or whether we're going to perform. You know, does it keep up to the quality that we hoped for? The amount of money that was invested, yes, it was a massive overspending on that particular project, and the time frame was about a year longer than what it should have been. So all of a sudden we had diminished, and you constantly wait and say, right, how do I make a success from this? So as a start, why don't we resolve basic terminologies? You know, preferably before a project starts, but if we don't get there, then why don't we do it during the project? Why don't we just isolate and don't ask questions? You know, we assume that those people need to understand. Now, I've worked with quite a few engineers and architects and construction crew. You know, they always say that the language is very flavorful from a construction site, and I believe that to be true, same as ships. But, you know, too often we don't just say, okay, listen, do you understand what I mean? You know, even now, when I speak to you guys, or the recording at least, do you understand what I mean? There are different languages being spoken right now, and the question is, are we in sync? You know, so I believe that is one of the major problems that we face, and one of the major hurdles for BIM to be successful, even in the property business after the construction side. You know, in this world where massive data is being generated, I was at a presentation from, I think it was on AWS, and they said the company, or it's the company that generates the most data per day is Boeing, these big jumbo jets. They do some ridiculous amount, but it's about 80% of the total data per day is being generated by them from all their flight radars and their flight data. Now, in BIM, building information modeling, and I'm sure you've been hearing many people speak about this, but if we only look at the I in BIM, and I believe the I is the most important component, and that is the information. You know, so if this is information, right, it's data. So what data is it that is critical to you? Why do you need to make this project a success for the coming future? Why do you need to make this project a success? Because it varies per stakeholder on a project. You know, for the architect, it is to have this wonderful building, or whatever the case may be. For an engineer, it's to say, you know, we've streamlined things, and we developed something new, and we created this fantastic thing along with the rest of the professional team. The construction crew, it's building something and finishing to the quality and to the standards that was expected in the beginning. But what is it to the owner-operator? What is it to the facility manager that needs to take this property further? And I believe, you know, those are questions that we don't generally ask ourselves. So be that selling the project, the property after the project is completed, or be that operating this in the foreseeable future. You know, how can you better utilize all this information that is generated and help you plan your project further. I was part of a project for a hotel. We were really just supervising. I wasn't doing much else. It was a hospital that was being constructed, and we implemented certain BIM processes. We couldn't do everything because there were too many stakeholders on. The project was already partially in. But I asked the owner-operator, what are some critical things for them? What are they struggling with right now that they may see as hurdles when they are 10 years down the line or 5 years down the line? And one of the things they came back to me with was the maintenance budget. The maintenance budget is too high for the supposed generated income, and we needed to look at that. So we looked at how do we utilize existing information, and the bonus was the stock that the hospital had to have from maintenance. So, this ranged from light bulbs to plugs to anything maintenance related. Toilet seats, I remember, was another big one. And they bought ample amount of this. And because we could help plan them, we actually reduced that budget by about 45% over a 5-year period. Now, for those of you in the property market, and for those of you that own businesses, for those of you who run your own household budgets, if I could tell you, you could save 45% on, let's say, maintenance costs or a big expense in your household, if you could save 45% of that, obviously it means that you have more return, you have more cash at the end of the day to do something else with, correct? So they were able to utilize that information in this fashion so they could generate better cash flows and reinvest that into new technologies. This hotel chain then implemented this similar process into part of the other ones, and they have now found that they could, instead of opening 3 or 4 new hospitals, sorry, it was a hospital, not a hotel, they could open up 10 new hospitals. Now that is significant, if you look at your social impact, if you look at your medical impact, if you look at the business impact, this is massive. And it was such a small change. Well, for us it was, but for the owner-operator it was massive. So the question to you guys is, well, where do you start? Well, it starts with the objectives. It starts with what are your objectives for that project? As I mentioned earlier, the architect has different objectives, the engineer has different objectives, the construction crew has different objectives. What are your objectives from the owner-operator? Again, that information, you remember I said information being important? Well, your objectives as the owner-operator directly ties it to the information that is being relayed, constantly verified, and expected out from the project. So your objectives are critical to the success of a project. And this is how I believe the property business or the facilities management business can greatly benefit from a process like BIM. So the question I got for you is, your objectives that you have on projects that you're doing, is that a winning objective? Is that to win, or is that just merely to partake in the race? If you look at the picture on the screen, which one of those guys do you want to be? Now, if you want to be the winner, then I would recommend you don't just ask yourself, how do you stay on budget, or how do you stay on time for your construction? You look and say, how do we integrate these things a lot more seamlessly in order for you to benefit from that? If you want to partake just in the race, just to say, at least I was there, I would assume that you can continue doing the things that you're doing right now. So the question is, I've mentioned this now already actually, is where do you start? And this is something that I get quite frequently, whether it's an engineering firm or a project management firm or an architectural firm that we do BIM implementations with. There's one facilities firm we're busy with the same thing. The question that we generally get is, okay, so where do we start? We need software, we need hardware, we need this, we need that. And I say to you guys, time out. For you to start, you need to rock up first. Okay, that's the first thing that you need to do. If you are not in the starting blocks, it doesn't matter. You're not there. And one of the things that you need to do in order to get there is, let's go look at your objectives. Let's go look at how does your business align to benefit from better information, better understanding of existing information. So it's an intrinsic look at how to start. As I mentioned, that for these firms that have done it in the past, this has actually been the most difficult part. They always think that the most expensive component is new technologies that they need to purchase. It's not always true. It's sometimes true, or new softwares that they need to purchase. Again, it's not always true. It's sometimes true. Too seldom do they actually look at their complete business strategy and they say, we can adapt this strategy to far better benefit from this, and we can move this forward. And the question is, how on earth do you expect this to work for you if you're not looking at your strategy, your objectives, your mission, and all of those components that maybe was written once for a business plan to get funding in? These should be live documents, because those live documents play a massive role on your success for a project. The other component to this is time. So I was consulting with another engineering firm at a stage, and they said, what they started doing on projects that they are actively busy with, and owner-operators were vested in BIM processes, is they actually insisted that from the kickoff meeting, so that's the very first meeting that they have, that the maintenance manager is actually part of this conversation from the get-go. And I thought, that's genius, because those are the guys that tend to suffer the most. They quickly need to fix something, a water pipe or a geyser bursts at 2 a.m. If we're looking at that type of facility, they constantly need to recalculate the surface area of the wall so that they can get the paint, so that they can, those types of concepts. It's time. Those are all time-consuming activities that has a cost to it. So by re-looking at your strategy, and you're now saying, okay, well, how do we change this? How do we come up with a better strategy? Who do you need to involve in order to get to a better strategy? Perhaps you're busy with an existing project and you say, all right, let's finish this project the way that it's going right now. But in the future, maybe you want to continue working with the architect or the project manager or the engineers or whomever on that project. Why don't you have an open conversation with him right now? I think sometimes we're too shy to look at that, and we don't want to ask those questions because we're scared of the answer, actually. So I believe that we need to look at these things and ask ourselves, how do we improve on that? Okay. We've got to then take that information and improve our existing business processes, our existing business outlooks and strategies and objectives. If you can streamline this, you'll have a phenomenal impact on the product that you're delivering to your clients, because ultimately we're all clients of clients of clients of clients. So, the questions you should be asking yourself, and one of the questions I generally ask people on this is, if you got more streamlined information from a professional team on a project, okay, and you could integrate that into your CFAM systems or property management systems or whatever the case may be, even financial systems, how could you better serve your clients? How could you potentially find additional revenue streams? Because there are opportunities. The question is, are we looking for it? Okay. And then how do we integrate this? How do we get information flowing through? The project teams, and I've been very involved with that, as I mentioned before. The technologies out there have really helped streamline it. It's not a perfect system, okay? It has many flaws, and there's no such thing as perfect software. However, there are definitely tools available, be that software, hardware, or mobile, whatever the case may be, that could help you integrate this information. I was working with we were consulting with a property management system. It was more accounting based, one that's fairly familiar. And what they have done is actually they asked us to help them from an Autodesk perspective. At that stage, it was Autodesk specific, and the system to how do we integrate some of the information that they capture. There are various tools out there for construction sites that help you do markups and capture information as your project progresses. And they said, well, if this is already captured, how can we literally just extract that and bring that in? Because the process were to send in a team of about 15, depending on how large the project is, to recapture a lot of that data. Remember earlier I said 80% of our time is spent? So they were already looking at how do we change that? How do they integrate the systems? The question is, in the system that you're using today in your business, or there's various systems because there's always multiple, how can you streamline those? You know, a lot of the times software vendors, and I will put up my hand here as one of them, will say, purchase new software, you know, but very seldom there are minor tweaks. Let's use Excel as an example. Okay, so firstly, I'm one of those people that when I use Excel, I'm always very cautious, because if I delete a formula, it will take me about a half a day or 2 days or 3 days sometimes even to get that formula back. There are definitely downfalls, but for the purpose of the explanation, when we use Excel as an example, how many of you can do the massive calculations that Excel is capable of? Or do you simply use it to maybe just do a sum here, calculate that up, do a couple of pivot tables? So you don't utilize the full power of the existing software that you have. And that's my challenge to you, is how do you utilize that? How do you ask questions to help you improve on that? And you know, as I mentioned before, it can be perfect. It can be seamless. It can integrate well. It cannot have issues. Or we simply just have to start, because it doesn't have to be perfect. And I can promise you, majority of the time, actually all the implementations I have done, none of this have ever worked perfectly. Okay. But the ones that made it a success are the ones that at least started. And the question that I want for you today is, are you willing to start? And start by looking at your own company and saying, what is important to me? What is important to my company? Financially, look at your finances, particularly look at your operational costs, okay? And ask yourself, if you could pick one or two of your operational cost lines, which ones would you like to reduce, and by how much would you want to reduce that? Okay. Based on that answer, you're going to work out a strategy on how to achieve that. Okay. The question is, once that you've picked, keep in mind that it could be because you have a revamp coming, or you have some of these new projects coming perhaps, and you need to implement that in that environment. But here's the kicker. You've got to keep it simple. You know, we get stuck in the detail and we forget that things need to be simple in order to adapt it. And I believe that because we overcomplicate things, it's the single biggest reason we are not successful in the implementation. So coming from a property background, coming from an operational background actually more, I could have benefited so much more if I had valuable information at hand when I did my budgeting for my annual budgeting for operational costs. Even when I looked at revenues and how do we generate more revenues, you know, planning, I need to repaint, I need to recarpet, I need to do this or that and the next thing. You know, how could we do that with a lesser amount of impact so that we can optimize our revenues? These are questions that I can guarantee you a lot of service providers don't worry about. But if you don't keep it simple, you will struggle to implement this and it will be a failure. So I want to thank you for listening to me today. You know, I am very passionate about this topic. I believe that there's so much that is possible. And I just want to recap. You know, for me, the most critical component on BIM, building information modeling for the property industry, is the information. So by the way, it's the same information I say to architects and engineers and everybody else that forms part of a BIM workflow, right? But it's the utilization of that information. Okay, so firstly, it is information is critical. And I believe it's due to information that the property business is not benefiting substantially right now from implementations of BIM projects. Okay, and I believe it's one of the reasons they can't monetize a BIM project effectively, or they don't see the reason to invest in a BIM project. Okay, so the second thing that I want to mention is, we talk about the information. Second thing we're talking about here is time. How much time does it take you to search for information? How much time does it take you to verify information? How much time are you wasting because you're not prepared to invest in the 10% of a project instead of the 90%? So take your learnings out of the 90% and implement it in that 10%. And what I refer to that is take your learnings from operating your properties or your facilities or whatever the case may be. Okay, take those learnings and ask, how do you write it into your project scopes? How do you get involved in your projects and ask the right questions so that you can benefit from this when your professional team have all gotten their value out of it already? Right. And the last thing is, we live in a complicated world with massive data floating around on our daily lives. Okay. How can you keep it simple, streamline your company objectives, okay, your company strategy with your project objectives, and extract the valuable information that can help make your business a success? I firmly believe it's with conversations like these and this phenomenal initiative between BIM Africa and the BIM Community Africa to establish BIM Harambee, and all the stakeholders involved giving valuable time and information so that you guys can learn and we can take this and we can drive it forward and we can generate an Africa that the rest of the world will be jealous of. And I do believe that we will skip some of the learnings that the UK and Norway and Americas and the rest of the world have gone through by trying to implement this, because we can already look and see what has gone wrong. We can choose the best and we can implement it and make that a success for us moving forward. So I challenge you to look intrinsically and ask yourself some hard questions and figure out what works for you, because it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for the next person. Enjoy the rest of the content on BIM Harambee Africa. I know I am. And if you've got any questions, please use the forums, ask the questions, email the team at BIM Harambee Africa. They'll get the right people to get to you so that your questions can be answered. From myself, I want to thank you for the time and the privilege of having this conversation with you. Goodbye.